Good afternoon to all the viewers and welcome back to ICCA Live, World Class Culinary Online. Today we have the third session in the series of webinars on Sugarcraft, Decorate Cakes Like a Pro, and it is on the topic of sugar flowers. I will now hand over to our host, Shanaz Raja, Director of Courses at the ICCA Dubai. Over to you, Shanaz.
Thank you, Karun. I'll just get my screen on. Yes, here we are. Thank you. Today, it's a feast for the eyes. A veritable garden of sugar flowers is what you're going to see. This is not just about learning to make any flower. It's about pushing yourself to the next level and being able to get competition level detailing into your work and make life like sugar flowers. Nature has created millions of beautiful flowers for us to enjoy, but today we can show you just one. From getting the perfect shape of the petals to texturing them, assembling them to make the flower, and finally a few painting techniques to finish them. Most of you on this webinar have been here before and are familiar with Nasreen Danki. But if you are not, Miss Nasreen is a master sugar crafter who devotes herself to teaching sugarcraft 6 days a week, including on Saturdays for those who work during the week. As always, during the webinar, you're welcome to post your questions on the chat, and I will collect them for you and ask them to Nasreen at the end. Without further ado, over to you, Nasreen.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome, and we wish you a good day in whichever time zone you may be in. Today, we bring to you the third triad of our webinar series, and it is on sugar flowers. Now, the first module was rolled sugar, but I want to point out that flower making is also categorized as a rolled sugar skill because flowers, leaves, everything is rolled. Everything we make, all the detailing you see around me is rolled to either specific thicknesses or specific shapes, and therefore it is categorized as one of the rolling skills. So, along with it falling in that category, for flower making, there are various alternates that come into play. For example, for cake making or decorating a cake with flowers, you can decorate with wired flowers. You can decorate with non-wired flowers. Now, the difference being a wired arrangement has to be attached directly to the cake. So there isn't much elevation there, but a wired one gives you the elevation required. Non-wired connects directly to the cake. Wired affords you a cascade away from the cake. And I'm going to demonstrate small techniques today, whether your flowers are wired or non-wired, edible or non-edible, cutter assisted or non-cutter assisted. When I say non-cutter assisted, they're finger done, they're finger flowers. You can have focal flowers or filler flowers. What do I mean by that? If I took that and I covered it, where does your eye fall? Nowhere in particular, correct? Because it's searching for a focal point. Yet if I take my hand away, you do. That's the focal point, that's the first place your eye hits, and then it will travel to take in other details. So, there are focal flowers and there are filler flowers, the focal ones being the larger flowers. And then, of course, in the course, you're taught not just the flower, but its bud, leaves, coloring technique.
Looks like Nasreen's screen has gone off. She'll be right back. Maybe they have a technical problem. Just waiting for her. I can hear them coming back, so probably we'll have them back with us soon. There you are, Nasreen. Got a bit worried. Okay.
Welcome back again. We have technical glitches all the time. That's just part of life. So getting on with where I left off, I'm not sure where you heard me up until, but what I was saying was, there are not just the different techniques we make flowers, whether they're handcrafted or cutter assisted, there are different shaping techniques we use as well. Every flower petal, every leaf cutout is shaped or fashioned in a particular manner. It can be frilled, it can be veined, it can be pinched into shape. These are petal edge softening techniques, which I'm going to demo for you in the making of this next flower. Now, just to give you a sneak preview, the flower I'm going to make for you today is the Cattleya orchid. She is an exotic flower. She's one of the more labor-intensive flowers to do, but it's a focal flower. So it takes up a lot of place when you put a larger focal on a cake. You need less fillers. You need less fillers. So if we're ready to rumble, I'm ready to roll. Okay, now, there are cutters involved for this flower, and the different parts of the flower have different shapes of cutters. So what I'm going to start with is making the central point that supports the flower entirely. And that is, it's called a spadix. So it's a crack-free ball rolled into what I refer to as a baseball bat, and then flattened on one end and rounded up with a ball tool. You can round it up, or with a finger indent. So when that's ready, we insert a wire into the tail end of it, and then you end up having the spadix, or the spathe, that you can connect the tongue onto, which is what I'm going to do next. So the tongue is a large piece. She's the largest part of this orchid, because although it has 5 other component parts, this is the largest one. So if I place her here, there's a specific thickness that orchids are because they're fleshy flowers. So one has to roll to match that. There is absolutely no, what's the word I'm looking for? There's no match to beating the master architect, but we can come a pretty close second to making your flowers, giving it the realistic edge. So I'm cutting out right now, and my cutter refuses to give me my paste, but there you go. And then I will dust. Now, earlier I spoke to you about veining or shaping techniques. So the next thing I'm going to put to this cutout is her vein. And we have, this is another nifty tool, because the tools for flower making are very different to sugar crafting or a modeling, for example. And we have a veiner here, and she gives you what is almost the fingerprint pertaining to this flower. So I'm going to place it and transfer its impression to my earlier sugar cutout. There you have it. I'm not sure if you can see this, but it has put the veins in place. And second or further to this, I will frill, because the feature of an orchid, it has a heavily frilled tongue and the 2 ears, the left and right. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, I will show it to you in just a minute. So I'm getting this tongue frilled, putting in a feature that this particular component part of the orchid has. And there we have it. So she's been frilled. It's a heavily frilled platform. Dust so it doesn't stick to my fingers. And give it a little bit of shaping. And then gluing. Now, how do I attach it to part 1 that I just made, the spathe or the spadix that I just made? Is like so. Move it to the end of the sponge. This is what I made for you a little earlier. This is attached to the tongue. So I'm going to pick this up and attach it, connect step 1 to step 2. And she is going to be left to dry because, as you can see, it's flopsy mopsy cottontail. She's too delicate to work any further. So we have, to our advantage, flower drying formers. And this is one of them for the orchid, for lilies. It's a dual former, and it'll help that shape up. So I'm going to take that out of the way so you can see the next steps that I will do. And while it dries or leathers up, I'll work out the next component parts for you. So that's the one I just did. Now, so that is here, the tongue attached to the spade. Now, she has a left and a right. I call them 2 ears, left and a right. And it's done with this cutter. So, again, if I roll out, it's the same procedure. I roll, I vein, and I cut out and place into its relevant former. Now, this particular component part is wired. So, she requires wires. So, if I place that and cut out, much like before, I will dust to desensitize the surface and vein it. So, can you see I've done a cheat on my gloves today? I've cut my 2 little fingertips out because to make flowers, you need the feel to be able to roll or to pinch or to exert the correct pressure for flower making. So, that's my little cheat, sneak peek. Uh-oh, she stuck to her veiner. Okay, that's stuck irretrievably, and that happens all the time. But to your advantage and mine, I have made a spare, and what I was going to show you is it was rolled, it was cut, and it's veined the same way as I did the tongue, and then placed. After wiring it, it's placed. Where's my tube former? There you go. It's placed in here. I've just finished making this, so it's still wet, but it is placed in the former to give it drying, the opportunity to dry in the shape that the actual flower has. So we have various shaping tools, drying tools, modeling tools to facilitate that. The next that this orchid has is a long cut, 3 of them actually. If I can show you, right here, part 1, 2, and 3. There are 3 component parts, the other 3 component parts to this orchid. Again, I have rolled, I have used the relevant cutter, which is this one, veined it, and wired it. Now, quick step forward, and you will see that these parts not only have to be rolled and cut out, but also colored when dry. And we have dusting colors that we use. We have paste colors that we use. I'm just going to put a little bit of a tissue here so I can show you the coloring techniques and how it's done. So, if you took, you need to have a good set of brushes for flower making, for coloring flowers. So, if you take yellow, which I'm going to do, and give yourself, or give this little petal a yellow vein on the back, then that's done for all the petals. Then I will take this purple that this particular orchid is going to be colored in, and holding your brush, almost catching the edge of that, you drag inwards. So it gives linear definition, as well as giving the flower the relevant color scheme that this particular one that I'm doing in. Mind you, orchids come in varieties of colors, shapes, sizes, and they are a beautifully exotic flower to look at even. Some of them have a fragrance, some of them not. there you have it. Now I've given linear definition as well as put the central vein on. And that has been done with dust colors. Now I spoke earlier of having paste color applications also. So if I used, oopsie, spilled. If I used paste color, here's how it's done. You need to have a nice brush. And on those that I've already done, you will see I've put stippled detail right here, little stippled dots detail, which this petal now needs. So let's go forward with it. And I will put a few dots on here. Don't want that to get in the way. Put a few dots on here to give this petal the features she needs. And hoping my paint dries quick enough, because the next thing I'm going to show you is the assembling, how this flower comes together to the absolute beauty that she is. So we've got the 5 component parts pre-done, because it's not possible for me to roll out the flower and show you its assembly while wet, because sugar takes hours to dry. So I have pre-done these, pre-colored, given you a sneak peek as to dust coloring or paint coloring, and now comes the final assembly. And what do we use for the assembly is another tool that you won't find in the sugar paste module. It's used only for flowers, and it's florist tape. So it's taping techniques that create the beautiful bouquets that we have for placement on cakes, because there are classic shapes used on cakes. For example, you could have a posy-shaped bouquet, which is circular. Then you have a crescent-shaped bouquet. Then you have the Hogarth curve, or you can have something like this, which is triangular in nature, which is called a jackknife spray. So besides that, there are wreaths. You can make little wreaths. Now, this is a little wildflower wreath that I created a while ago. But circular arrangements, triangular arrangements, S-shaped arrangements, C-shaped arrangements. I'm giving you the very basic names for this, but they have proper names in terms of cake and flower making, which is crescent or Hogarth or posy. And I'm just going to get these component parts in position one by one to show you what this finished flower should look like. Now, I'm hoping that I do not smudge the wet paint. So, handling carefully, I should. And I'm taping this. Now, florist tape, much like cling film, doesn't have it has a slight glue of its own. Tiny, very tiny molecular bubbles of resin built into the fabric of the tape, that when you stretch your tape and activate it, those bubbles pop and make your tape kind of sticky. Your fingers get a bit tacky after you've been taping for a while. So I won't be able to feel that tack today because I've got gloves on. But just to let you know. So can you see I've put the main spadix spade, which supports the tongue, the left and right ear, and one appendage, and then the other 2 come. Between this and this, you'll have one, and between that and that, you'll have the other. So let me get them in position for you so that you can then view the completed flower. And there are so many coloring techniques because flowers come in so many colors, shapes, sizes, textures. So we try to replicate that in this garden that you see around me. Every flower has a different color or a different texture or a different shaping technique, or it's wired or it's non-wired, or you need a cutter to make some of them, whereas some of them are just finger done without a cutter. And we're done here, so I do not need that anymore. We have a taped stem. You've greened over your stem, and I will show you this finished beauty in a minute. There you have it. So, after cutting out, I have dusted the petals, and wired them before that and allowed them to dry so that I could then color individually. This is quite an involved flower, so I cannot assemble first and then color. So I color first, petal by petal, and then assemble, as you just saw me do. And you have a finished orchid. Now, question for you. Is the question going to be put on the format?
Yes, put it on.
So
yeah,
that,
put it on, you, Nasreen, I put it on here. Okay, are sugar flowers edible?
Are sugar flowers edible? Think about it before you shoot me an answer, because I have an equally surprising answer for you.
So 66% say yes, 18% say no, 0% say maybe, and 21% say partly.
Partly. Okay. The
So
partly ones are okay. The partly ones are partly right, because think about it. Every petal had a wire in it. The wires are non-edible. The wires are non-sterile. So although the flower's been made with sugar, because inserted into each petal is a non-edible component part, or it could be stamens, which could be choking hazards. So although the flower is done in an edible medium, actually, sugar flowers should not be eaten. The advice given to somebody you're making a cake for with sugar, wired sugar flowers should be, please don't eat the flowers, because each flower has a wire in it. Now, for those who answered partially, well, when you eat a lollipop, you don't eat the stick. So you can chomp on the outer bits and hopefully don't break a tooth by getting too close to the wires that are embedded in each petal. But the correct answer to that is sugar flowers, wired sugar flowers, are non-edible. What makes them edible? When they are non-wired. When you have a non-wired creation, for example, I've got a few samples here for you. Non-wired, to where you place your flowers on a plaque, or you can glue these flowers with royal icing directly to your cake, then they become completely edible, because there isn't a wire in them. There are no non-edible component parts to it. And so then it makes it completely edible. So wired sugar flowers should not be eaten. Just wanted to clarify that, because not many people are aware of it. And that's why we wanted to pose it as a question to enlighten people who thought sugar flowers can be edible only when non-wired. Okay? Now, I mentioned earlier to you that the tools of this trade, the tools of flower making, are very different to perhaps the sugar paste module we had, or the royal icing module. Now, you will see next week's webinar where we have the nozzles and a different set of tools completely. For flower making, we've got an odd set of tools, because it's not only your florist wires, but it's pliers, tape, wires themselves, which besides our food colors and everything, and then of course the flower cutters and the stamens that are used inside each flowers, you have veiners that are involved, and these only come into play with flower making or for flower making. The rolling board and the rolling pin pretty much stay standard for all our sugar rollouts. But we have a unique tool set for flower making. And another misconception that people have is that these flowers for cakes can be done or made with fondant. I mentioned to you last week that fondant is a very weak sugar paste and doesn't dry. Now, if I wanted the flower, take for example the flower I've just made you, when I make a petal and I want it to hold its shape in a particular attitude, all 5 of them, fondant cannot do that for you. She's too weak, soft, won't dry, it'll fall off the wire. Whereas when you use the sugar paste or a flower drying paste, flower making paste, which is your gum paste or your CMC paste, she will dry good and strong for you, and the flower is then able to hold its shape for you. So I just wanted to clear that again, because a lot of people say fondant flowers. Fondant flowers can be done when you're doing like small, thick rollouts like this, so that it's directly supported on a sugar bed or directly onto the cake. But if you're going to wire them, they won't stay, because fondant doesn't really dry hard enough to support a wire support a flower on the end of a wire. Okay, I have another question for you. Do you want to roll that out? And we will have answers for you as well.
So the question is, why is it important to use professional techniques, tools, and cutters to make sugar flowers? And for some reason, everyone has, no, they changed. Okay, the more answers coming in. We'll give it a minute.
Okay. Interesting to see what the answers will be as to why we need to use tools, cutters, and professional techniques for this particular skill set.
So 11% say it is so that I can become a professional decorator. 77% say it is to increase speed and accuracy in producing sugar flowers. And 9% say because flower making is difficult.
Okay, now to make flower making easy is why we use a cutter and all the relevant tools. One, because it makes the ease of cutting something out faster. It makes the finish absolutely professional, and it makes you a good time manager. Your productivity levels increase, because think about it. If you had to sit and hand fashion a petal or several 177 petals, how long would that take you? Yet, if I use the right cutter and I cut out all of them, my productivity increases. Why is that important in this line of work? Because when you have good productivity, if you ever want to make this a business or go commercial, to have commercial viability, your time becomes your money. And so it's up to you. If you're a hobbyist and you want to just do it by hand, it will take you way longer to do, and you will not get as professional a finish. Whereas when you have the cutter to do it, it cuts down your work time 1/10 almost, gives you a perfect finish, and you can make much more in the time it would take you to hand fashion one. So those who answered, the 77% who answered were the ones who gave me the correct answer. Yes, to have a more professional finish in a shorter time frame, and making your time more effective and productive and professional. So I've asked you 2 questions. It's your turn to ask me if there's anything you want clarified, questions you may have, doubts you need cleared, and I'm happy to do so. So it's your turn now. So say now.
We have plenty of questions from Renuka George, and I think all the questions will be good for everyone else too. Okay, so the first question, what is the tool that you use to roll the sugar balls? Is that a normal cutting board? So I'd like you to lift up the cutting board and show it.
She looks a normal cutting board. It is a normal cutting board on one side. So I would roll all my sugars and do my colorings on this side. But when I want to have wired flowers, look at the other side of this board. Do you see these grooves? The longer groove for perhaps, if I have a cutter here, I'll show you. The lily cutter is a longer cutter. So she requires a longer groove. The smaller ones, the leaves and the petals I just made for the orchid, require the smaller grooves. What do these grooves come handy for? I'm going to show you the reverse of my flower. Can you pan in on that for me, please, John? I want them to see the grooves on the back. One, it is a feature of the flower or the leaf, but it is also the wire housing for a wired flower. So it hides my wire in the rear of the petal or the leaf so that it does not show. No wires show from the front. So that is why a grooved board will facilitate that for you for any wired flowers. Hope that answers your question.
The next question is by Tanushree, but I think you've answered that about gum paste versus using fondant. You just answered that a while ago. The next question is from Rochelle. Rochelle would like to know what fat you use when you on the board when you roll out the petals. The fat.
Beg your pardon? What fat? Oh, in a little jar here, I have some Crisco. Now, Crisco is available in the market. It's a vegetable shortening. I don't use ghee or any other because ghee is an animal derived product, and it has rennet in it and it goes rancid, whereas veg fat does not have the rennet in it, and therefore it sugar won't go bad, or it doesn't have any after effects after sugar has dried, or smell, or any reaction to the sugar. Now, be warned, in the market there are two types of Crisco veg fats. One is a yellow tin, which is butter flavored, and it's colored as well, yellow, to look like butter. And that's not the one you want to use, because that will not work well with white paste. It will turn the color of the paste to perhaps an eggshell or an off-white, besides which it's butter flavored, so you don't want to use that. Whereas the blue Crisco tin has pure white veg fat in it, which works best for flour making. It's also a shortening, so it's used in cookie making. It's used in so many other culinary avenues. Hope that helps.
Nasreen, the next question is about wanting to see the cutters, getting a close-up of the cutters. Can you place them on the white board and ask John to zoom in, probably on the on both, so on both sides of the cutters?
I have bought for you a small range today, but there's a huge variety out there, not just of the cutters, but their relevant veiners. Now, also what I use today, you might be able to see it clearer because I've got purple dust on it, but the veiner I use today is a single-sided veiner, meaning it would give me the impression, it would transfer its impression to only one side of the petal. Whereas you get veiners, if you want to do really super realistic work, you get double-sided veiners that actually sandwich your paste in between the rear veiner and the frontal veiner, giving you veins on both sides of the petal. But it just depends on, if you're going in for competition, definitely use a double-sided veiner. For commercial purposes, these are fine because they just put all the details you need on the front of where you need them, for the various flowers or leaves or what. And we have simple veiners for our pin. The simple pin acts as a pin veiner for the more or the less detailed flowers. But those flowers that have a more detailed fingerprint, I would just then go for a silicone veiner that gives me that, because imagine, I'm not sure if you can see the details on this, but imagine having to pin, vein in all those details. Christmas would be here first. So that is why veining, again, making us better time managers, increasing our productivity level with a professional finish, we use veiners. So I've got a small selection. I'm not sure. Can you see that? It's sliding off my board. I know what I'm going to do. If I put my non-slip mat on top, there. Now they won't slip. So look at this petal, for example. She's the lily petal, and she comes with her own relevant sized veiner. It fits in there. Or you can have a cutter like so. That's why I brought you one of each, which has its own plunger veiner. Can you see that? If I retract it, or if I roll out my paste, plunge, it gives you its fingerprint for this particular flower. Now, this little flower, this little cutter can give you a daisy, a gerbera, an aster, a zinnia, a sunflower, because they all belong to the daisy, a chrysanthemum. They all belong to the daisy family. This, along with its left, right, and the three appendages, is the orchid I just made you, or the rose cutter. And like I said, I'm just touching the tip of the iceberg here and brought you a few selections, but there is a range because there are different cutters for honeysuckle, different cutters for forget-me-not, different cutters for foxglove, different cutters for wild roses, different cutters for poinsettia. There's a range of cutters out there. So if you're taking flower making for cakes seriously, equip yourself with all these cutters. It makes your work much easier, much more professional looking, and makes your time worth your money, because you work faster when you use a cutter and get a much more professional finish. Does that help? Hopefully.
Yes. And can you describe that sponge you have on the left side? The sponge.
My pink sponge.
Yes,
Take a peek. Underneath the pink sponge, I've got another white sponge. It's all because we graduate from when I want to frill something, I need to trap my paste between a rock and a hard place. So frilling is done on the hard board, or using a cutter. I would cut against a hard board to get a clean cutout. Yet, if I wanted to shape those petals, I will go, I think I showed it to you last week when I was doing rolled roses. I will go to the softer board. This board does not have as much give. The rolling board has no give, but this board has softer give, and the pink sponge has so much give, so that when I want to cup something with a bowl tool, she will allow me to do so without tearing the petal. So hopefully it's a nifty little tool used for flower making. As well as I use my sponges as little drying platforms. When my sugar is wet, I place them on the sponge to dry, because a sponge breathes, drying your undersurface as well as what is exposed to the air on the top. So hopefully that helps. I will familiarize you. When someone books in for this class, you are taught a variety of paste making, that you're taught tool familiarity, technique familiarity. You become better versed with what goes with what, for what, to be able to use them correctly, to gain the relevant or the correct result professionally, to get a beautiful looking flower because you've used the right tool or the right cutter and the right paraphernalia that goes with it. Hope that helps.
And once again, what did you dust when you were rolling? What did you dust with?
Potato flour. This was a question in last week's module, where I said don't use corn flour because corn flour ferments in sugar, whereas potato flour has a beautiful symbiosis. It bonds with the sugar, giving you a non-stick surface to work with, so that your petal or whatever you're working does not stick to your fingers or your tools or your rolling board. But when you do want to bind that sugar back into a crack-free ball, potato flour allows you to do that, whereas cornstarch does not, because cornstarch is anti-caking. So it you can't get the cracks out of your sugar after you've dusted it with corn flour, whereas this you can. She blends better. Potato flour blends better with your sugar. Also, she doesn't ferment in the sugar. So, hope that answers your question.
Renuka, by now you would have figured out that the materials of the cutters might be silicone, like as with the veiners, or they might be polycarbonate things and stuff. About now, to the next question is going to the next level. Actually, can we also add fragrance? She wants to know
fragrance to your sugar. Why not? But you've got to think about, if you're making a white flower and you want it to be strawberry fragrance. Now, which strawberry essence that you can put into your sugar will leave your flower white? It will influence the color of your paste. So you have to think about that. Vanilla, yes, you can because vanilla, I'm not talking about the pod vanilla, but the vanilla essence powder is white and can be incorporated into your flowers to give them a vanilla essence or a vanilla fragrance. But you have to be careful with all other essences, because every essence holds its own color, which will then influence your white paste if you're making that particular flower in white.
Okay, so Renika also wants to know about the color you have used. Is it gel color?
Yes. Concentrated spectral gels, natural colors, which are Artisan free, which is the E102, 104, which gives kids hyperactivity. It's not really good for children. So these colors that I use are Sugarflowers from England. They are natural colors. They are Artisan free. They are fat free. They are GMO free. They are suitable for vegetarians. They have been certified kosher by the ICCA. That means they're halal. They're also nut-free for so many kids who have nut allergies or any allergies. These colors are nut-free. And to put the crowning tin lid on things is they are concentrated spectral gels. So I hardly have to use a wee bit, and it gives me vibrancy of color without having to empty the whole jar. If you use a color that is non-concentrated, you'll use quite a bit of color to get a vibrant red, for example, or a deep purple, or a sunshine yellow. These you barely use a little bit. And for health and hygiene reasons, they are natural colors. So it's not a color derived from a petroleum base or a chemical color. So hope that.
I think that's a good answer. So Renika would also has asked, can we color petals when they are wet, or do we need to wait till they dry?
Different flowers require different stages of preparation. The one I made for you today, I cut, shaped, waited for it to dry, then dusted and painted. Now, if I chose, there are other flowers in the range that as each petal is wet, I dust them right at that stage and then set them to dry, and then assembly comes later. So it just depends on the flower you are making, because different flowers require different stages of completion. Hope that helps.
Yes. So also the next question is, how long can the flowers be kept, and can they be reused once you've already made them?
Can they be reused? That would be difficult, because if I've made a cake and given it to my client, how do I get the flowers back to reuse them? 1. 2, if you've done something at home and you've placed flowers on one cake, and before the cake was cut, you want to remove the flowers to reuse them perhaps on another project. Yes, of course you can keep them, just making sure that if you've placed it on a chocolate cake, it hasn't picked up chocolate, or the flowers have gotten stained by buttercream or anything else that you placed it on. Also, my recommendation to you is, whenever you are making a project, every project, make it fresh, so that if anyone, especially for non-wired flowers, anyone eating those flowers gets flowers that are freshly made, gets sugar. The dough that it's made from is freshly made. So for 2 reasons. If you use an older flower, it might have dried hard, and somebody attempting to bite it can break a tooth or hurt a gum. So small considerations can answer that question for you. But all in all, a sugar flower stays for years if you want to keep it. If ever you want to reuse it, you make sure that when you've kept it or where you've stored it, she remains dust-free. You don't want to put something that has been open or in a display cabinet and got dusty and then put it on a cake that someone's going to eat. So these are the small points you will have to keep in mind when you want to reuse a sugar flower. Preferably not. Give everyone a fresh flower making endeavor every time you send a cake out with decorated flowers.
I'm coming to a conclusion that Renuka and Tanushree should come and do the course.
There is a lot to learn. You learn when you're taught, there is no match to when you're taught professionally. It equips you not only with a skill set, but it equips you with a certain confidence to go back without your instructor on hand and then start making flowers confidently, because you now know the logical steps they're made in. You know all the details, you know the right materials to make which flowers in, and you're familiarized with tool familiarity, technique familiarity. Knowledge is power. So that's all I can say. And going further is, you know that we have 3 modules that make up that equip the student towards a master's certificate. The first module was last week's webinar, which was the rolled sugar skills, modeling skills. This webinar is just the flower making skills. Next webinar is going to be our liquid sugar, royal icing and piping skills. And when royal icing and sugar paste together make up the backbone of cake decorating. But so many occasions also require, weddings to name just one, requires flower making. So putting all 3 together equips you with a skill set. If you're thinking of opening up a business, you have all the wherewithal to be successful, because now you have all the knowledge, all 3 skill sets required towards that success. So Hope that helps. And all I can say is, whether we're making flowers or whether we're piping or whether we're rolling, every task we undertake becomes a piece of cake, a beautifully decorated piece of cake. I'll leave you with that today and look forward to seeing you next week. Over to you, Shanaz.
I was just joking, Tanushree and Renuka. Don't get pressured with me. Anyway, thank you, Nasreen. I'm sure there are some viewers here who are with us on this webinar who've seen such lifelike sugar flowers for the first time ever, just the way I did when I saw your flowers for the first time over 15 years ago. About this particular webinar, there are no handouts to share because it's a demo. And if you ever feel like making a sugar orchid, all you need to do is watch the replay. And if you need to learn more, you know where to find us. And as I say to everyone who shows interest in cake decorating, this kind of training is the best investment you can make into your life. Thank you, everyone, and see you again with Nasreen for the last webinar in this series next week, same time, same place, and same day. Until then.
Thank you, Shanaz and Chef Nasreen, for yet another interesting session. Definitely a lot to learn and take away from today's session on sugar flowers. For those who missed out on the complete live action, an email will soon follow with a replay video of this webinar. And we look forward to seeing you in the next session on Sugarcraft, of course, and that will be on royal icing and piping. Until then, goodbye from all of us here.